Anyway, last week we started in John 6. The whole reason I'm in John 6 is like as a parallel passage to Peter's revelation, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, that whole thing in Matthew 16. So we went to John 6, which is a parallel passage, but it's hard to see initially. And we just took the word where because that was the question that was asked to Philip. You know, where shall we go to buy bread? And we spent the day kind of with the where. And you've heard me talk on and off for years about John's language and his little codes and the way he uses things throughout his gospel. And where is one of those words. Where for John is like the Father. When Jesus says at the Last Supper, you know the way and you know where I'm going. And they said, we don't. And he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father. He identifies the way and the where is the Father. In John 13, when the supper begins, Jesus knew that he was where he came from and where he was going to, which was the Father. So for John, this is an ongoing thing, this where thing. I can't wait to meet him, to be honest with you, because I just think it's so fascinating in the spirit, what he got in the spirit, but also the intellect that could put all this together in a way that he has, to me is just amazing. And the little, I don't want to call them games, but it's almost like for those who are hungering and thirsting, you'll get this, you'll be fed and whatever. And there's a lot of stuff, you know, the waters turned to wine. They didn't know where it came from. Jesus with Nicodemus, the wind blows where it will. You don't know where it's coming from or where it's going because you don't know the Father yet. But the people that are born of the Spirit, that's what they're like. They understand, I've come from the Father. I'm here for a while, blowing around, and I'm going back to the Father. You know, they know the where. In John 4, the woman at the well says, where are you going to get this water you're talking about? You know, so there's an ongoing thing with this where for John that we talked about last week. The ultimate one, we didn't really talk about last week, but the ultimate one is when he says to the woman, where are your accusers? For me, that's as strong as you're ever going to get. Man accuses. Man is critical. Man condemns. That's all the of man. That's all man stuff. God doesn't do that. The of God, where are your accusers? They're someplace right now talking among themselves. But you won't find one in me, because I'm not of man, I'm of God. Jesus is not an accuser. Or a condemner or anything like that. So we ended saying one of the key things was Jesus lifting up his eyes, is what it says in verse 5. He lifted up his eyes. And he says to Philip, where are we going to get the bread from? You hope you can kind of hang with me a bit here. I'm not saying that Jesus didn't look up to heaven. He lifted up his eyes. But John uses a spiritual language, which is what to say, I'm looking at Russ, but I'm looking at something entirely different. I'm looking at a man of God that God has created, who's filled with power, I'm seeing something entirely different than when somebody else would just see a human being in front. When he lifted up his eyes, it's spiritual language, that Jesus is looking at a situation, but he's not looking at it as of man, he's looking at it of God. Remember, no man comes to the Father unless the Father draws him. I got 5,000 people in front of me. I got a funny feeling Dad's doing something. The question is what? Well, I'm not going to know by looking at 5,000 people. That's not going to cut it. All they're going to do is lead me in the wrong direction of what man always wants. What I need to do is to lift up my eyes to heaven, to lift up my eyes to my Father, to open my eyes, Dad, what are you doing? And in that context, he's leading Philip when you're in a situation where you know, no man, Word of God says, no man seeks God. Well, then what are they doing here? Father's drawn them. You get it? If they're here, it's because Father's drawn them. You don't have to wonder what Dad's doing because they're already here. He must be doing it. That's why they're here. This is where Jesus operated in recognizing the work of his dad and his work and the whole thing. So we looked at that, lifted up his eyes, and he recognizes that the situation he's in is very similar to the nation of Israel when they were in the wilderness. There's a lot of people, where are we going to get food? We're starving to death out here. He looks to the place from where manna came, to his Father. It's a spirit, there's spiritual implications. Again, I'm not saying, so I hope you don't misunderstand me, that he didn't look up. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that what John said, he lifted up his eyes. And if you look at that expression throughout the four Gospels, you'll see when Jesus lifts up his eyes, he's not
looking up like this?
It's an expression that means he looked beyond the current situation and he looked beyond and up to his Father. Let's read John 4:34 and 35. We read John 4:34 once before. You know, I have food that you don't have any idea what that whole thing. But let's read John 4:34 and 35 to seal that and move into today.
Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say, 'There are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest'? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the field, that they are white for harvest."
He's encouraging them. He's telling them this. We've talked about this before a few weeks ago, that he's identifying my food. And right away again, he goes, food. John 6, feeding the thousand. My food is to do the will of the Father. I am communing with the Father. We are of each other. You know, he's talking about, and there is a work that I've got to do that comes out of that place we've talked about. And he says to them, the next verse, so lift up your eyes. Don't look at people the way you're looking at people. Look at this harvest. Look beyond what you're actually seeing. Don't see them as just a bunch of people. Look beyond. Lift up your eyes. Look at them the way God looks at them. This is all of what Jesus is talking about here. Because there's a bunch of Samaritans coming. And he knows when they see Samaritans, oh, they disgust me. And Jesus is like, get over it. They're Muslims. I can't. Get over it. Get over it and get on with it. Oh, they're black. Did you ever see those dates? Get over it. This is what Jesus is saying, and much nicer than I'm saying it. He's saying, lift up your eyes. Stop looking at that with the of man eyes. And look at them through my eyes, because they are ripe to receive the love of God in their lives. So, lifting up the eyes is a real clue in that whole thing. We ended with Luke 8, where he says to them, let us cross over to the other side of the lake. And they encounter the storm. He's sleeping in the boat. They run to him, don't you care that we're perishing? And he just deals with it, but then he asks them, because the word last week was where? Where is your faith? Where is your faith? Is it in the Father, or is it in man? I wish God had given me this message last year during the elections, because we could have solved a lot of problems. Where is your faith? In what God's going to do and wants to do, or in man, if we get the right person in office? It's a powerful question. Who are you putting your faith in? It doesn't mean that we don't want good and right people in powerful positions, but ultimately God says, that's my situation, not yours. Today we're going from where to when, because in John 6, as we progress through, which we're going to do, Jesus walks on water, we're going to read that account, and there's a whole bunch of whens, and we're just going to have fun with the whens. It almost like picks up from the end last week. Let us cross over to the other side of the lake. Can we get beyond Tiberias and get to the lake and stop being Tiberias minded? In John 6, we're actually going back a little bit into the feeding of the thousands at verse 12, and then it's going to go through the story of Jesus. It's the next thing that happens. So it's chronologically sound. This is all happening on the same day Jesus walks on water. Verses 12 through 21.
So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up, and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose, because a great wind was blowing. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going.
The parallel accounts are found in Mark 6 and in Matthew 14. And things that John doesn't say, the other guys did. We're not going to read the entire accounts. Now, Mark is the first gospel, remember, and he's given the account that we just read from John. This is Mark's. We're not going to read the whole thing. Verse 45.
And straightway he constrained his disciples to get into the ship and to go to the other side before Bethsaida, while he sent the people away.
Right. So Mark tells us a couple of things that John does. And first of all, Jesus told them to get in the boats and go. John doesn't tell us that. So that's kind of important, that they weren't just, well, I don't know where Jesus went, but I'm getting out of here. They were commissioned to get in the boat and go to the other side. Mark makes that clear, to go before him. Something I just want to throw out. Every place we go, we know that Christ is in us, but we also know that we go before him. Because if he's in Mary, and he's in Russ, and he's in me, and I'm going someplace, and then you guys are going someplace, then we're kind of like going before him. We're always going before him. We're playing a certain part, a certain role, whatever it might be, and he's going to follow it up. None of us are Jesus. We are sons of God, but we're not Jesus. We are the body of Christ. So, part of this going before him, Jesus had done this before. But the key word, you didn't say, you had a different word, straight away, did you say?
Yeah, it said straight away.
Yeah, well, in other translations, it would say immediately. Stop and think about it. 5,000 people, okay? 5,000 people just had this thing happen. Their response is, let's make him a king. That's what it says, John says. They were determined. They were going to come and make him a king. So 5,000 people are coming to make him a king. He's got his 12 disciples. What do you think their response would be? I mean, think about these guys. 5,000 people want to make you a king now.
Yeah. Jump on it.
Oh yeah, we're home. We're in, baby. I don't know what else is going on, but we are going to the palace. Jesus doesn't even let that thought get off the ground. Immediately, he sees them coming. Immediately, get into a boat, get out of here. Think about it. Because Jesus knows that his disciples at this point are not prepared to handle 5,000 people deciding we want to make you guys kings and princes and everything else. Immediately get into the boat. Also in Mark, in verse 49, you don't have to read it. In verse 49, Mark is the one who says they thought it was a ghost when they saw him coming on the water. John doesn't say that. He just says they were afraid. But they thought it was a ghost because in their day, the folklore, the superstition was in a storm like they're in, at night, like it is, the spirit of death comes walking across the water and you're gone. That's it. That's a sign that you're out of here. So they see, as far as they're concerned, they see the spirit of death coming and they're afraid. That's kind of what's going on behind it, kind of thing, that Mark puts us a little bit more in the loop kind of thing. But in Mark 6, would you read verses 51 and 52? Mm-hmm. Because this is something that I think is important from Mark's account that we need to take into consideration.
And he went up unto them into the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened.
Those are some hard words. If you catch the hard hearts, you know, that kind of thing. All I want to say is this, that storms, and we've all been in them, some of us are still going through them, storms will reveal the condition of a disciple's heart. Whether we're panicking, whether we're afraid during the storm. Storms have a way of doing that. Oh my God! These are not like criticisms and ridicule. It's just, it does. Times get tough, and we find out where our trust, where our faith, where is your faith? We find these things out. Because we can talk all day long. Oh, pray. We can get goofy, go to La La Land and have a field day. And the truth is the storm hits. What am I going to do? Well, if you look to man, you are in trouble. You're glad I didn't say that word I was thinking. You're in trouble if you're an of-man person. But if you've lifted up your eyes, if your eyes are looking at something else, if your eyes are connected with the Father's, and we know he told me to get in the boat. So if this is my coffin, so be it. He told me to get in the boat. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. He told me to be there. I'm there. I think I'll just fall asleep like Jesus did. Just grab me a pillow and lay down in the back of the boat. Enjoy the ride. They were afraid. They were superstitious. This whole condition that they find themselves, there's no sense me picking on them because we're all the same. We see something in a situation, oh no, I know what this means. Well, I know what man says it means, and it's a bunch of nonsense. So Mark is important. He's the one that lays down the first thing. In Matthew 14, we've got what Mark said, but we've also got Peter walking on the water. Now, you would have thought Peter walking on water, in Mark's gospel, he might have said something about Peter walking on the water. Unless you remember Peter, who's the one who says, humble yourself in the sight of God and you shall find grace. And Peter is the one that's dictating to Mark what happened. By the way, Mark, I think it's a good idea if we remind everybody that I did walk on water. Peter's like, no, I don't want to talk about it. I'm done with talking about Peter. It's not really important because that's not what it was about. It wasn't about me walking on water. It was about Jesus walking on water. Besides the fact that he sinks. So if you're going to start by walking on water, you better tell him, yeah, and then I sunk. Oh, me of little faith. But anyway, it's not in Mark, but Matthew decides, hey, not for anything, I was in that boat. I remember. I want to tell you what happened. Because there's an important spiritual truth there that has to do with Peter walking on water. Because the thing is this, Peter didn't walk on water. Peter walked on the word. He was given a word. He said, give me a word. If it's you, give me a word. Because I know I can stand on your word. That's all I need is a word. But they have to be careful because just like Peter, when he saw how awful the situation was, is what we hear. The winds were boisterous, the sound, the whole thing. When he saw that, bam, he sunk. And he's crying out to Jesus, save me. Because he went from standing on a word that he got from Jesus to looking at really what's happening around. And we've heard this preached a million times, so I'm not going to get off on that. It's just that in Matthew, that is actually recorded. It does show a certain condition of the disciples, but it also shows us something else. Would you read verse 30, Russ?
But seeing the wind, he became afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me.
Now, no sense picking on Peter, because they were all afraid. They all thought it was a ghost, and they were messing their little togas or whatever they were wearing. They were all afraid. Peter was not alone. So, fear is consuming all of them in a storm. And then verse 33.
And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, You are certainly God's Son.
Now, that's the very last part, last verse. After Jesus gets into the boat with Peter, grabs him, the whole thing. It says they worshipped him when he was in the boat. They worshipped him. And they, would you read what they said again?
You are certainly God's Son.
That is as close to thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, as you're going to get. It's using a lot of the same terminology in the Greek. About 75% the same. So it gets kind of interesting. So it's like, wait a minute. I thought over in Matthew 16, Peter comes up with this revelation, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he's commended before all the boys. But actually in the boat, 2 chapters ago, when Jesus walked on water, all of them said that. Close to that. You are the Christ. You are the Son of the living God. Got it. It's kind of interesting. What I'm saying is this, because this is really important, I think, for us to get today. The condition of the disciples, it's a human condition. But there's also revelation in there. There's a revelation of who Jesus is. And we've got kind of like this mixed bag. And if you look around the room, you got a bunch of mixed bags. That's what we are. We're a bunch of mixed bags that have a level of revelation because of the time we've spent with Jesus and our Father. There's a level of revelation that needs to increase, but we're still in a condition when storms hit. All of a sudden, we're wondering how this thing is going to play out, and I'm afraid. Because we're human. We've got this mixture of man and of God always kind of playing with us almost. John, I am convinced, writes his gospel, and when he decides to write about the walking on the water, I think this whole chapter, starting from the feeding of the thousands to the walking on the water, to the identification, I am the bread of life, to the rejection, to Peter's revelation, is all a great big thing by John trying to say to us, listen, you guys are so consumed with the condition of disciples and the amount of revelation. I don't want to, you know what I want to talk about? I want to talk about the great I am. I want to tell you what the feeding was actually about. And it was about him. It wasn't about the signs. How did he do that with the, who gives the bread? It's not about the bread. It's not about how he did it. It's not about the signs. I was thinking about it this morning. Lord, how does this kind of work? If you got conked in the head, so you lost your memory, would you walk around the entire county of Monroe County until you saw a sign that you said, oh yeah, that's where I live? Nobody in their right mind would do that. They'd reach in their wallet, they'd pull out their driver's license and go, oh, that's who I am and that's where I live. I better get there. Because who they are is already on them. Instead of going around looking for signs. You don't need them all. You've got the sign. There's no more are coming. No more are coming. I know we want them because they fascinate us. If it doesn't tell you where, what good is it? It's only of man. It's got to be something that points to the Father all the time. He lifted up his eyes. It's got to point to the Father, because out of that place is where everything else happens. So, John, I'm convinced, he's going to get to this revelation that Peter had. But it's more important to get to the who and what this whole feeding was about, the great I am, not the signs or the disciples' condition. John is preparing something, it's almost like a parallelism to the wilderness that Israel went through. And that's what we're going to see in the next few weeks. But it's not even about the wilderness, it's about the transformer. When I say the transformer, I don't mean more than meets the eye. Did you ever watch that, the Transformers, when you were a kid? My kids were all over that stuff. You see, the fascinating thing about this, in verse 12 it says, when they were filled. When what was filled? The baskets. Is that right? When the baskets were filled. When they were filled.
No,
When they were filled.
the people.
When the people were filled. Were the baskets filled? How many baskets? 12. How many disciples?
12.
John 2. How many water pots? I don't expect you to know. 6. There were 6 of them there. How many water pots? 6. And what were they? Jesus said, fill them. Fill them up to the brim before he transforms them to wine. Fill them up. What does the woman in John 4 leave? She leaves her water pot. Why? Because she's become one and she's filled. And off she goes to Samaria, pouring out these living waters. You see what I wrote here in my notes? You know, the water pots are filled in John 2. She's filled in John 4. When we're filled with water before we've been transformed, we might be able to walk on water, but we're not able to pour out new wine. You see, in other words, please don't misunderstand me, because I don't want to come against Pentecostalism or anything like that. But be filled with the Spirit, be filled with the Spirit, be filled with the Spirit. I agree. Get filled with the bread of life. Get filled with the Spirit, but be transformed. Because otherwise, when you look at the situation around you, you sink. Filled, but not having the faith, because you haven't been transformed, to be poured out. The woman is filled and she pours herself out. She leaves her water pot behind. That's of man. Some guy made that. God made this. And now I am of God. And now what I have to offer, what I pour out, is something entirely different. Be quite honest with you, I couldn't care less about walking on water. I'm having too much fun standing on the Word. Let somebody else walk on water. It makes a nice freak show. And then when the storms hit, what happened? They sink. You see, you can be filled and still be frightened during a storm. And sink. Instead of, and it doesn't matter what sea we're talking about, of man, of God, Tiberius, it doesn't matter. In case, and none of us have noticed, and I know we all have, being a Christian, storms still come. They don't seem to go, oh, you're a Christian. I'm not going to bother with you. Storms come. The question is, not so much the condition of the disciples. It's who's in the boat. And we've heard this before. Who's in the boat? Because if he's in the boat, when they were filled to be transformed. That's key. You're filled with water to become wine. And what do? Oh, I'm a great fit. No. There's a wedding that's depending on the filling of those water pots being transformed. There's another when they had seen the sign, they said, truly, this is the prophet. It's a nice way of saying, when they had seen the sign, they recognized this guy is of God and he's coming to the world. He's coming to the world of man. They got that. They know that this is part of John's little playing with the wilderness. Moses said that a prophet would be raised up like him. And he said that when they were at the edge of the wilderness, about to go into the promised land. So they're looking and they're saying, this is the prophet that Moses talked about in the wilderness. And can you appreciate where John's kind of coming from? John knows that he just shared the feeding of 5,000 people with the bread, the manna that comes from heaven. He knows what he's talking about and what he's doing. These people, they start to get a glimpse of that, and John records it. He's the only one that says that. He records this, the quote from Moses, and John puts that in there deliberately. Again, it's a half-baked revelation, but John's leading us through something that I'm hoping in the next few weeks we're going to be able to appreciate more and more. They come up with this revelation that they're right. He's the prophetic fulfillment, but they don't know what that means. It's just like we've been talking about, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah. What does that mean? Not what you think it means. He is the prophet. What is the prophet going to do? Not what you think he's going to do. This becomes crucial. That's why they don't recognize him on the water. Jesus is right in their face, and they think he's a ghost. They don't recognize it because they don't know him. They still don't know him, and that's okay because he's in the revelation business of revealing himself more and more. And as this chapter goes on, it gets absolutely outrageous. But at this point, they've seen the sign, but they were afraid. They didn't recognize him. He's coming to them in the storm. They don't recognize him. Just a little aside. Signs don't still storms. So all these signs that the church is craving after, signs don't save you in a storm. Signs don't even give you hope in a storm. Jesus does, the Savior. You need a Savior. You need to be saved. That's what we need to be. Saved in a storm. It's a half-baked revelation who he is. Filled, but they don't recognize him. These are challenging words for all of us, quite frankly, I think. Filled, but they don't recognize him. They saw the signs, but they don't recognize the sign maker. When Jesus perceived that they were coming to make him and of men like them, to make him a king, they're going to make him a king, the King of glory, the King of heaven, the King of all creation, the King of kings. Now we decide we're going to make him a king. It's laughable. I can almost hear Jesus saying, and what might I look like? Would you make me in your image and likeness? You see, when Jesus sees that their intent is for them to make him a king, he books. He immediately goes up on the mountain again of God. I will have no part with any human being trying to make me a king like the king they want. I'm not doing it. Don't get too uncomfortable with me this morning. Because our biggest pitfalls and letdowns with Jesus is because he's not us. He doesn't do things the way we think he should, the way we know he could. It goes on and on and on. We just want to enthrone him. We want to put him on a throne. We want to make him king. We want to, he will not be made into the image of man. And if we could only get it through our heads and our hearts, that we've been made in his image and likeness, not the other way around. And the only place you can go to keep that thing sorted, if he meets with the 5,000 people, Jesus is no dummy. If he meets with those 5,000 people, he is throwing himself into Tiberias. Might as well throw an anchor around his neck. He goes to the mountain, tells the boys, get across the lake immediately. I'm telling you, this is a very dangerous of man, of God situation. He goes to be alone. He sends them across while the people are clamoring for a king. In John chapter 2, verses 23 through 25, this is early on in John chapter 2. This is shortly after Jesus does his first sign, his first miracle, the water to wine. Has a go at the temple, making sure people understand that they are treating his temple disrespectfully. And then at the end of John chapter 2, verses 23, 24, 25, somebody read that.
Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, during the feast, many believed in his name, observing his signs which he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, was not entrusting himself to them, for he knew all men. And because he did not need anyone to testify concerning man, for he himself knew what was in man.
He is so focused on the of man, of God thing. And he's not going to pour himself into an of man situation. He knows what's in man. He knows their expectations. He knows the way they think. He knows that they want to make him. He knows all these things. And he's not having it. I am not going to be made in the image of your likeness. I've already been made in the image of my Father. And I'm revealing the Father to you all the time. And you need to come this way. I mean, the one word that he says to Peter on the lake, when Peter says, give me a word, he says, come. And that is a loaded word. Peter, come to me. Come to me. Don't worry about storms. Don't worry about gravity. Don't worry about any. Come to me. So what I got to do is do that word. Come to me. And he knows that early on in his ministry, so to speak, this again, this idea that they're going to make him a king is a half-baked revelation, because they think they know what the prophet, what a king, what a worldly kingdom. This is what they want. It's scary because most of the time that's what we want. We don't even know it. We don't even see it that way. What we look at this world as though it's the beginning and the end instead of him. Like all of this around us, all this thing that we're immersed in all the time, that it should work a certain way. And we've got the only if this, if that. This is wilderness thinking. Wilderness thinking. Where are we going to get food out here? Crying out loud, we had garlic and we had all good stuff back in Egypt. What am I doing out here anyway? Quail, manna, water from rock, sticks in water that, it's just like, what does all this mean to you in the wilderness? It's a flipping wilderness. It's not your home. It's a wilderness. It's a wilderness. Why do you want to get so comfortable in the stinking wilderness? David, would you go to Psalm 20, verse 7?
Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God.
That's a really nice way of saying it. You do what you want. If you want to trust in chariots and horses, all the things that man can do, if you want to trust in that, that's not saying we never ride a horse or get in a chariot. It's just saying if that's where your trust is, in money, in the things of this world, you can do that if you want. You can put all your trust there, but not me. My trust is in the Lord, of God. I'm going with Jesus up on the mountain. I am not going to stay down here and wallow in this mess. I'm going to lift up my eyes. I'm going to look and see what God is saying, what God is doing. I'm in the father-son business. That's what we do. We work together. That's his point of view. When Isaiah says, whose report will you believe? That's what he's saying is, it's kind of like if God has said something, if God says come, walk it out. Just walk it out. Because that's the word that we walk on. That's the word that we stand on, is what he said. If he says get in the boat and go to the other side, get in the boat and go to the other side. Just go. Just go. When evening came, they went down to the sea. I'm not picking on them because we already said that they were instructed to get in the boat, to go down to the sea. But I do wonder a bit. Jesus goes up to the mountain, they go down to the sea. He goes up, they go down. I wonder if they realized that they were in the up and down business. That every time Jesus went up, he wasn't staying up there, he was coming down. Because that's what he said, ascending and descending. You go down, I'm going up, there's a ladder between us, up and down. I will lift you up, I will come down. They were in the up and down business. They were in the ladder business. Do you remember what Jacob says when it's a reference to Jacob's ladder, when he has the dream and then he wakes up? And he says, how awesome in this place. How awesome is this place? It's the place of up and down. It's the place where Jesus goes up and down. It's the place where I go up and down. How awesome is this place? God was here and I didn't know it. You see, when they got in the boat, what did they take with him? They didn't take the physical Jesus that was up on the mountain praying, but they took Jesus with them. If he says go, they've got a word. Their word in that boat is the same word that says come, walk on the water, and they walk on water. If they recognize that when evening comes, darkness comes, but you got a word. You got a word. At least I hope you do, that we're not wallowing around in darkness that we shouldn't be walking in. I hope that we're operating in the Word. I hope that we're walking and standing on the Word. I'm hoping the Word of life and the Word of truth is the of God that we're obsessed with, rather than the of man. Whatever man says, God bless him. Lovely bunch of people. But I'm going to walk on that? I don't think so. They were in the ladder business, the Jacob business. And I don't think they knew it. Evening came, darkness comes to all of us, quite frankly. But what does it say in the very beginning, Genesis 1?
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Mm-hmm. And there was a condition on the water. There was water. It was a bit messy. But the Spirit of God was hovering. God says, let there be light, and that whole thing. But then at the very end, the last verse is, and the evening and the morning were the first day. If you can hold on to this word, your life is going to change, I'll tell you right now. If you understand that when darkness comes, when evening comes, it's the beginning of a new day. It is not the end of anything. It is the beginning. It's the beginning of something. When darkness comes into their lives, when it gets dark and they're out there, they should be rejoicing. This is the beginning of a new thing. Because this is how new things start. They start in the dark. And then they come into the light. The evening and the morning. Rest assured, David said it repeatedly. Joy comes in the morning. I'm telling you, this is the beginning of something. It's not the end. Boys, do you realize? Come on. This is what he's saying to them. Remember your Bible. You know, you cherish it. You kind of bow down to it, for crying out loud. Can you remember it then?
Yeah.
In storms, what does Jesus do? He snores. He walks on water. You know, whatever. Kind of meaningless, because I was already there. I was already in the boat with you. If you're in the boat, I'm in the boat, in the Spirit. Darkness comes. Man, that's my long suit. Darkness comes to all of us. It tends to be the atmosphere of storms. But it's the beginning of something new. It's a new day. It's a new day. And if we gravitate towards that, it's just like, oh my goodness. I've been praying for something new. Well, how did you think it would come in?
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you think you'd find it? We don't like that. So can't we do day without darkness? Can't we do king without suffering and death? Can't we do cross without a little, Yes, we know he's in us. The last when. You having fun with this? I am. I love this stuff.
It's amazing.
It says when they had rowed 3 or 4 miles. I'd like to be in the boat with you. Because I don't think I can do 3 or 4 miles. I think that's basically what he's saying. Is I told you, we're going to the other side. I don't care if you ever roll a lick. See, because what it says here is when they had rowed, which is a nice way of saying once they had used all their strength, all their ability, when they were absolutely spent in this storm, being afraid of ghosts. You know what? They are I'm to the end of myself. And Jesus is like, thank God. Now you can willingly receive me, because I am not going to pounce in you. I'm not going to pounce on you. I'm not going to jump down your throat like Ghostbusters or something. I ain't doing any of that stuff. When you willingly, of your own will, decide the will of God, my food is to do the will of God, to be with Him. That's my will. I've made that decision. That's where I am. Then He's willingly saying, great, now we can start and get you to the place where I said we're going. They willingly received Him into the boat, storm, the whole thing, and then they cross over. They cross over, like He said. Let us cross over. We need to cross over from Tiberias. We need to get out of this water mentality and get into a wine mentality. We need to be transformed. We need to cross over. John 5:24. Go ahead, Danielle.
Most assuredly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life.
Faith, you pass from death to life. You cross over. Now. Not when you die and go into the ground. No. You've passed over now. You've crossed over. You put your faith in Christ. You've crossed over. Your life is hid with Christ in God. You've crossed over. I don't want to burst any bubbles about heaven and all that. But we've already crossed over. We're already seated in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. We've already crossed over. That's what Jesus says. If your faith is in me, you've crossed over. Storms, I've already crossed over. But look at it. Why? Okay. What am I supposed to be looking for? Isn't it scary? I don't know. If you haven't crossed over, I suppose it is. If you haven't lifted up your eyes, I guess it is. If you actually think that somebody's going to get the up on the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the King of Heaven, the King of Heaven, the King of Glory, the King of all creation, I guess if you see another king greater than mine, I guess you could be afraid. Which is what we see when we have half-baked revelations. That's what we end up with. Is someone greater than the situation I'm in, or me looking and saying, why am I going through this? Why this? Why that? So for crying out loud, it's the only way to get you into a new day. It's the only way. And I'm not going to apologize for it, because I know what I'm doing. And you do well to willingly receive me into your boat. When they were filled, when they had seen the signs, but came up with, when Jesus saw that they were going to make Him into His image, when evening comes like it does to all of us, and when we're finally done with rowing. Anybody in here tired? For crying? I am. I've had a storm this last week. I didn't even pick up an oar, quite frankly. It's a storm. It's the beginning of something. It's the beginning of something. I'm telling you. From where last week to when this week, but the last verse we read said that when he got in the boat, they immediately made it to the place where they were going. From where to when to where, the whole idea is crossing over, being transformed, not just being filled with water or bread or questions. It's not any of that stuff. It's the crossing over from all the of man stuff to the of God stuff. No matter what storm, no matter what situation, no matter what circumstances, what do our eyes behold? Are they going down someplace and living in a down someplace? Or up? Look up. That's what Jesus says, your redemption draws nigh. Look up. And while we're doing this and stumbling over, says, no. Look up. The direction you're looking, look up. Spiritually, lift up your eyes. Look beyond what you see. I love when Paul says, I don't look at any man anymore after the flesh. When I see him, I see Jesus. I look beyond. I see Jesus. And it's only man that says, well, he doesn't look like much. And it's Jesus saying, I feel great. I feel great in this homeless person. I feel great in a drug addict. I feel great in whoever. I'm fine. And when we're transformed, then we can pour out new wine. Otherwise, we're just water.